Thank you all for agreeing to be a part of this discussion about service performance reporting under PBE FRS 48. For those of you watching, we have three fantastic panelists joining us today from three very different not-for-profits. But despite their differences, one thing they have in common is that they've all been recognized through the Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand Charity Reporting Awards. While we at the XRB were responsible for developing and issuing the standard on service performance reporting by not-for-profits, we think that one of the best ways to understand how to apply it is to hear the stories of other organizations that have already done so, which brings me to our panelists today. First, we have Jan Dunn, who leads the finance team at the Royal New Zealand Ballet. She's a former auditor and has since worked in several different organizations and has substantial governance experience in the not-for-profit sector. The Ballet were the winners of the Tier 1 and 2 category of the Charity Reporting Awards in 2022. Next, we have Craig Fisher, a man who's worn many hats, including consultant, auditor, and former New Zealand Auditing Standards Board member, but who is joining us today as the board chair for the Fred Hollows Foundation. The Fred Hollows Foundation were the runner-up or highly commended in the Tier 1 and 2 category of the Charity Reporting Awards in 2022. And finally, we have Josh Borthwick, and I hope I've pronounced that correctly, who is the CEO of Sustainable Coastlines. Josh brings extensive commercial experience to the organization from his previous roles with Stuff and Trade Me, leading their advertising functions, which I couldn't help but notice included a focus on sustainability. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, Sustainable Coastlines were highly commended in the sustainability category of the Charity Reporting Awards in 2022. But that's enough from me. You want to hear from our panelists today. And to start us off, I was thinking I would talk to Jan. And this first topic really is about balance. And balance is a key feature of the Service Performance Reporting Standard. It requires you to present a balanced view, meaning that you should be reporting on both areas where you perform better and areas where you performed worse than you expected. I noticed that in the Ballet's 2021 report, you put a lot of effort into ensuring that this comes across. For example, your measures for live performances were lower than you expected, but on the other hand, the talent development and digital engagement clearly exceeded your expectations. Can you tell us a little bit about how you approached reporting on service performance and the performance measures you chose, and explaining those to the reader?
Certainly. So for us, our performance measures have been very much a long-term thing based on our 5-year strategy, and then we have annual plans that we prepare every year. So it's very much a forward-looking thing. But one of the key things is that we're partially funded by the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, and we have an outcomes agreement with them. And so that clearly sets out the outcomes that we need to achieve and the services required to achieve those outcomes, and it provides a performance measurement framework. So that was really, that provided a really good basis for reporting that we've been doing for a number of years. So it wasn't something new that we needed to develop for the service performance, the new rules around that, the new reporting. So we have three, we sort of an overarching outcome, which is to provide and deliver ballet services which enrich New Zealand communities, express New Zealand's identity. And we do that under 3 areas. So one is creating cultural value, and the services we provide, that covers our 3 main areas, which is live performances in New Zealand, expression of, so we provide, we're actually a touring company, so that happens right through New Zealand. Expression of New Zealand's identity, that's making sure that we have New Zealand choreographers and set designers, etc., and the music is developed in New Zealand, so we're not always using international. So there's that whole thing about the New Zealand identity. And also another key part of that creating cultural value is developing New Zealand creative content. So our next key area is connecting communities. And a lot of people think, Royal New Zealand Ballet, we deliver ballet and we deliver productions, but a key part of that is actually education and community engagement. So we deliver a lot of, huge amount of activity and training in communities, and for example, in prisons and schools, very much, underprivileged. So we get a lot of specific funding for that, which is really important as well. And so the other area under connecting communities is the digital engagement now, which is a big part of what we do and getting people engaged online. So, and then our final sort of main area of reporting is around the thriving cultural sector and ensuring that we have long-term sustainability as an organisation. So those are the key areas. And sort of more to answer your question, so for example, in the last couple of years, we've been massively affected by COVID. That's had a huge impact on our ability to perform live performances. So that's where we've had to pivot towards that digital, and particularly when you mentioned the education area, that's been a massive area where we could really develop that. And so we were always, generally delivering our programs in person at various schools throughout the country, but that allowed us to do a lot of online videos, and we've had huge engagement and made it a lot more affordable often for people and to be able to reach right across the country. So it's been fantastic. So in terms of the digital engagement, that was another part of the question about how accessible that is to getting that information on the digital engagement. So the reporting on that's quite straightforward now, and we're able to access a lot of that data from digital agency and engagement statistics and social media channels, and long survey data from purchases. So Facebook in particular has made it really accessible to get that data. So it hasn't been difficult at all to get the data that we need to do our performance measures here.
Right. Thank you for that. And that actually leaves me with another thought. You mentioned that you've got these three sort of strategic heads. Were those set for you under your outcomes agreement, or is that the way that you've organised some of the metrics?
So that's all come out of our strategic planning and our annual planning process. So that was something that I guess it was developed many years ago, but it was definitely through the board and senior leadership, and then agreed with the ministry. So it was very much, led by us, but agreed with them in a formal way as well, the ministry, for our funding. Yeah. But it's very much about taking a long-term view, well in advance of the year that we're reporting on, and getting those measures in place and making them achievable too. Yeah.
And did you find that there was a real sense that it's important to make sure that whatever it is that you're choosing, you are doing so, reporting on that consistently?
Absolutely. So we don't, there might be a little bit of tweaking from year to year, but the foundation of what we're reporting on is very much, because that consistency of being able to, to see our story and our long-term journey is really, really important in terms of our long-term strategy. So, it's not,
Fantastic.
Makes sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And actually, this topic of strategy and linking this through really brings me to a question that I have for Craig at the Fred Hollows Foundation. The first thing that I absolutely have to ask about is the overall structure of the Fred Hollows Foundation's service performance reporting. Something that should jump out to anybody who reads this report is how clear and direct the report is. And I think that demonstrates how well the board and the staff understand the organization. And what I mean when I say that is that readers are able to start from the initial vision statement of the foundation and follow it through from that to long-term outcomes, then intermediate outcomes, and then specific outputs, which, like the ballet, are organized into strategic pillars, which are clearly defined. This structure and this form isn't really new for Fred Hollows Foundation. It's been in place for a number of years, but it's important to discuss because I've yet to come across another report that does this journey so clearly from beginning to end. And as the chair of the foundation, can you tell us a bit how this approach was developed?
Well, kia ora, Jamie, and thank you for that. It's nice, obviously, that is being communicated, because that's how I am. And I guess it comes back to what people's roles actually are. I see the fundamental role of governance. The number one job of a board is clarity around why the organisation exists, and then how it will deliver on its purpose. We've done a lot of work over the years in refining our theory of change, I guess you could call it, to use a technical term, how we choose to deliver on our purpose. And the word choose is really important there, because, all organizations have lots of different ways they can carry out what they do, lots of variety there. But I think the clearer that you can be on how you do that, the more deliberate and purposeful you can actually be on delivering on it. And to me, there has to be a logical linkage from that purpose to outcome. I think a lot of the reason that a lot of organizations have struggled a bit with their service performance is that they've kind of come at it as a separate exercise and something to do at the end of the year, rather than this should be a logical output of your reporting. Because if you're clear on why you exist, you're clear on your theory of change, your strategy of how you get there. From that, you should be clear on what are the measures then that you can look at and show that you either are hitting what you want to hit or you're not, and actually give you that ability to monitor and change and tweak. So, to me, there's got to be a really clear line from purpose to performance. And the clearer that line is, the easier it is to measure on this. I think that the other key thing is that this is a team game. I've got as the board chair, I get to be the chief cheerleader or fanboy for the organization in terms of why we exist, and try and get people excited about that. But what's delightful is that everyone in the team is really excited about why the organization exists. And if you can pull all of those voices in, you get a really nice balancing of, the finance people being able to do detailed finance, the comms people being able to do a really good story, the delivery team, in terms of what's actually happening on the ground, and pulling all those voices in gets to balance it out. And I think that's really important. And I think, if I reflect on our performance reporting, I think it's because we've had this really nice balancing of all of the different voices in the organization, that it acts as quite a good filter. It means that the numbers don't take precedence, or the story doesn't take precedence, or it sort of balances that out. And I think that's really important. But we've spent a lot of time as an organization refining what it is we do and how we do it. I tell everyone that we need to be able to have that elevator pitch. We need to be able to tell people what it is the organization does and how it does it.
I think that's definitely one of the goals that we had when the standard was first being developed, is having that clear line between why you exist and what you do. I've often wondered whether this sort of practice of vision statements has become super high level and sort of too abstract, just by nature, and people don't really consider it. Do you feel like this exercise of having to do this has sort of regrounded what your vision statement is in what you can do?
Yeah, I don't know about regrounded. I think it's definitely aligned it more across everyone, because possibly before we had to do service performance reporting, or before we chose to do it, we were already doing this to a form, and then the standards came in, and that meant that we had to sort of change a little bit in terms of how we do that. But I think if we'd asked everybody at the time, everyone would have had slightly different perspectives on what it is that we did. Whereas this has helped us actually have more in the way of discussions, much more deliberate discussions and decisions about what we do and how we're going to report that, how we're going to measure it so that we can report it. And those communications, those interactions actually help align everyone in terms of what it is that we exist. And therefore our message has probably got tighter over time.
Right.
Useful. And that's not to say there hasn't been some really good chunky debates in there.
As there always is.
Yeah.
Were there any particular parts that you found challenging? I mean, you're sort of talking through this journey of going from vision to long-term outcomes, intermediate, into outputs. Was there a step there that was harder than the others, or were they all?
Yeah, totally. And I think it comes down to your theory of change. So some of the stuff that we do is, and I don't want to diminish it in any way, but it's easier to do, and it's easier to count, and it's easier to report. For example, doing cataract surgery is the cheapest way to restore someone's eyesight, most common way to restore someone's eyesight if they have avoidable blindness. You can count those surgeries. You know exactly what it is that you're dealing with. You know the costs of that. It's quite contained. So from a reporting and a measurement and a monitoring point of view, that's kind of easier. Something like helping a health system that you don't control, so helping a country's health system, is way harder, because that involves a whole lot of different interventions, which often is just people's time and capacity, rather than things you can really wrap your head around and count really clearly. So that means that you're more challenged in those sorts of things in terms of how you can be clear that you are actually delivering on your purpose and what you're doing. And I think a criticism I've heard around service performance reporting from some people is, well, it's easy for your organization because it's easy to count your stuff. Whereas actually it should be hard for everyone to be really good at this, but it just requires having some thought there.
And on that mention of counting stuff, I think that's actually a good natural pathway into my first question for Josh. But before I get into it, there was just something that I really wanted to highlight in the Sustainable Coastlines report that I personally enjoyed, and that was the story highlights page. When the service performance reporting standard was being developed, an important goal was to give organizations a framework within which to tell their story, and it's fantastic to see that being taken to its natural conclusion. From the timeline alone, you can get a very real sense of the progress and the growth of Sustainable Coastline since 2008. But to my actual question on counting things, though, one of the key programs Sustainable Coastlines reports on is its litter intelligence platform, which collects and publishes data on litter density and type for locations around Aotearoa. Beyond being a very comprehensive way to monitor and highlight the kinds of change that Sustainable Coastlines is aiming to create, it also seems as though it's an incredible tool to empower communities around the country to join you in creating that change. Do you see that this kind of comprehensive data collection and reporting is a natural next step to service performance reporting, at least as a kind of aspirational goal?
Yeah, I think it could be. It's sort of reflecting on what Craig was saying about the challenge around measuring your impact against your purpose, particularly when you're a bit like us, you're trying to influence change across multiple sectors and all sorts of types of people around the country. So at a community level, we're training citizen scientists to collect and deliver that data. And we hope that they'll take action, as a result of that. But in a lot of circumstances, the action of collecting the data is their contribution, so working beyond that requires us to get that data in the hands of governments and policymakers and also businesses to create change there too. So we want to influence policy, we want to influence business decision making around how products are produced and then what's done with them at the end of their life cycle. So measuring that impact is challenging. So I think the data collection and the rigor around the data collection, Stats New Zealand and the UN endorse that. So it's of a very high quality. And our challenge moving forward is, how do we measure the impact that data is creating? So how do we actually follow that through in terms of the work we do to produce it, and the influence we might have on those organizations I mentioned, to our ultimate goal, which is reducing litter and marine pollution in our oceans. So yeah, so probably aspiration is the key term there. I think we do a lot to measure our outputs, and one of the neat things about more discussion and the highlights around service reporting is it's really challenging us to go beyond that, to go beyond the outputs that we create, and really start to think about and develop our theory of change more, so we can follow that all the way through and actually hand on heart as an organization. So we're impacting that, the money that we're getting is having an ultimate impact on that purpose and that outcome that we want to see.
Right. And obviously, because you've got these sort of two versions of reporting, there's one that goes in your annual report alongside the financial statements, and there's this live data platform. Did the live data platform collecting any of that change what you wanted to put in your statement of service performance?
Yeah, I think what it does is gives us a organizational discipline around collecting data and reporting on data and building that view of the year that's been all the way through. So, and it's not something we didn't actually start with litter intelligence. We started with beach cleanups. We were measuring volume of litter collected, and then litter intelligence is developed out of that. And we also monitor the plants that we plant around waterways when we're doing riparian planting too, and measure the sort of the volume of trees, but also the volume of volunteers and participation hours that go through that. So I think what that does for us as an organization is puts us in a really good position. By the time we're collating the report, we're literally doing that. We're collating all the data and the feedback that we've had throughout the year and presenting that in the most balanced way we can. So to Craig's earlier point, it means that we're not just sort of waiting to the end of the year and then scrambling to make up a story. It's happening all the time, and it's something that we report back on with donors and sponsors too. So there'll be various points in the year where we need to deliver reports on what we've produced for some of the funding that we've had too. So it feels like a natural rhythm and cycle for us.
Great. I will, for this next question, go back to Jan. And something that struck me when reading through the repertoire and engagement section of the Ballet's report was how many fantastic reviews you received of your performances. One of the comments that I found most heartwarming was from a disabled retired person who couldn't make it to the live shows, but was able to view the online performances, which it seems as though you've invested more heavily in during the COVID period. I was also surprised to see that you had viewers in the UK who were eager for you to come and perform over there, which I'm sure, given your focus on local talent, is a fantastic thing to hear. My question is, though, did the process of preparing this information and collating these reviews and these comments for your service performance report help you get a sense of the impact of the work that you do in the community?
Yes, I think it is. It's part of an overall reporting, and as Josh mentioned, we have to do a lot of reporting back in the same way to our donors and sponsors. So it's like an ongoing reporting process to all of those, and it differs. So it comes out of that as well as just what we generally do. For example, and often it's an opportunity to do something different or take something into a different area. So we started doing work in prisons, for example, where with delivering ballet classes in prisons, and we had a really good program in women's prisons, and one of our particular sponsors or funders just absolutely loved that program. That's been because of the great feedback and the engagement that we've been getting. That's been developed into men's prisons as well. So yeah, all of this has a huge impact on what we deliver and how things develop into different areas of focus. And we do work for sensory people, the blind, people with hearing issues. We have particular performance with them, and people with sensory issues. And so there's a whole raft of things that we actually do that have developed out of feedback that we've got on. So fantastic.
Yeah. And this is actually something that I've personally been wondering about. And it's come up a few times when when we're talking about outputs, that there are this definite set of things that you can measure, and it's, you can count it, it's very easy. But the ballet, a lot of the measures of what you do, at least that really get at the effectiveness of it, are not things that are easy to count. You can talk about the number of performances, but what I assume people really want to know is what people thought about those performances. Did you find that this was hard information to collect, or?
Well, it's quite amazing because particularly in terms of the education side, people just, like, we got an amazing letter quite recently from a delivery of a dance program into one of the schools for people with special needs, and this long letter just giving us this amazing positive feedback. So people are just so engaged, and they absolutely love so much. And we also do we do surveys as well in terms of our live performances, and so we have a lot of information coming back, and we have a really close relationship with all our subscribers as well, so that provides a lot of feedback. So there's just so many mechanisms for us to ensure that we're delivering what people want, and developing areas that we can. So yeah, it's great.
Jamie, can I add into that, if that's okay?
Of course you can, absolutely.
I think it's one of the beauties, actually, of the service performance reporting is that, the standard gives you a frame of what to report, and it's a reasonably loose frame if we're realistic about it. But the fact that you can report, quantitatively, qualitatively, descriptively, is really powerful, because it allows you that flexibility of what's going to be most appropriate, and that can even change from year to year, as COVID's shown a lot of people. We've had to tell more of a story in a lot of cases around what the impacts of COVID's been. But it also presents that challenge that goes with that flexibility, and that's what should the balance be, between the different ways of reporting your performance. And I think the biggest challenge with service performance reporting, personally, is how to communicate it clearly and succinctly. Because once you get people excited and into it, actually there's a real desire to put more and more information in, and then you can lose the reader, you can lose the user. So it's a constant challenge. It's a really good challenge, it's a good tension to have, but how do we best communicate with the different tools that we've got to use?
I think that's a very important point, because again, in the standard, it does say you want to provide a complete picture. You want people to get a sense of most of the stuff that you do, but it is just giving a sense, because of that risk where you provide too much information, you overwhelm people and they don't know what's important and what's not. So it is very important not to go down that route of just, well, let's just put everything in there. And something that I think is probably a question for everybody, and hopefully you don't have too many challenges with this, but I have heard in the past that people have encountered difficulties with audit, in the sense of having this information audited, and there's been at some times pressure to focus into the things that you can not very, but more easily count than some of those qualitative measures. Is that something that any of you have experienced? And if so, was there a way that you found to get around that? And maybe I'll start with Josh.
Yeah, I think my experience is that auditors are still getting their head around the non-financial components of auditing. So auditing the service performance is quite a different proposition, and it feels like, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this, but it feels like everyone's on a bit of a journey here when it comes to meeting the standards sort of now and into the future. And what we've been quite interested in talking with our auditors about is getting along to events, for instance, and seeing the data collected firsthand, and being a part of that, understanding the quality controls that go on between what happens at the event, how we count that, and how we enter that into our database. So I think there's opportunity there, but that's not a standard way of working for many auditors. When you think about auditing financial accounts, there's some time on site, there's a lot of time off-site and a lot of document transfer. So yeah, I think there's that provides quite a bit of opportunity for auditors to get more intimate with the organisations that they're measuring and counting, which should be a real plus. But I would say we've all got a ways to go before we're probably auditing to the same level of quality and detail in our support or our services and our outputs compared to our financials.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, just if I can add to that, I mean, we early adopted the Fred Hollows Foundation, and the auditors initially weren't that keen on that because it was an extra chunk of work. And, as Josh said, they were still in the learning phase, and probably more in a learning phase than what we were as an organisation. But a delightful comment for me at our audit wrap-up meeting from the audit manager was, I learned the most about the organisation that I've ever learned through doing this. And that to me was really useful. That to me actually almost sums up the point of service performance reporting, because it's about what the organisation is actually existing for, what it's doing. And the fact that the auditors learned so much more auditing the service performance rather than just the financials, to me is fantastic. One other experience I've had that's not so positive, and that's consulting to another organisation that was told by their auditors what they could report. And this organisation didn't really understand that actually the auditors had no place to tell them what they could report and couldn't report. And there was a bit of a power imbalance there because, they're a not-for-profit organisation that was short on resourcing and was concerned about the cost of the audit. So, that is a bit of a concern, that I think the auditors were possibly taking the path of least resistance in that case. And unfortunately, the client in that case wasn't aware that, they could actually push back on that. So, it's important that everyone learns on this journey.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an important thing to reinforce, that you don't really, as an organization, you're doing yourself a disservice by just going, well, let's just get something that can get our report out the door. Jan, I'm assuming that given how good the Ballet's report was, this is not a problem that you encountered either.
Yes, our auditors have actually been really proactive and encouraging, and we've been having conversations probably for a couple of years about it, but just, and really, and very much like Craig was saying, we haven't been told what to do, but very much encouraged to do it in the way that we would like to, and that, they're obviously, because we have been doing this, they're very happy with what we're doing. But the key thing I think is around those metrics and measures, that you're doing that as you're going through the whole year. And we're, because we have to do that for our quarterly reporting to the ministry, that's all in place and it happens anyway. I'd really encourage people not to be waiting to the end of the year to try and put things together, because it's a huge amount of work. You need to have those systems in place and that are working and they're automated on an ongoing basis. And, you can have no concerns that if whatever the auditors might, you don't want to be having concerns about whatever the auditors are going to test that. It's really important that you have that rigor there.
So it's really something that you should be focusing on upfront, and that's where all the work comes in, establishing the systems to make sure it's done. Yes. And I think an important reminder for everybody is that the service performance reporting standard will require you to present comparatives. So many organizations who will be applying it for the first time really should have already been collecting a lot of this data.
Yes.
Why don't I go back to something that Craig mentioned about it was really the audit manager commenting on the fact that it's the most they've ever learned about the organization. And I think that really speaks to one of the key effects of service performance reporting, in that it's about taking what you've got, this finance function that has maybe been historically thought of as a separate thing, and integrating it with the business or the organization really. And another aspect of service performance reporting that I think people often overlook when they're reading the standard is that you're asked to link the service performance information through to the financial information where that's relevant. Once again, this is something that the Fred Hollows Foundation report does very well. The charts that are presented as part of the service performance information split the revenue into two major sources, and they split expenses between the amounts applied to eye care programs and public education, fundraising and other administrative costs. There's also a further breakdown presented on how the eye care programs and public education expenses were allocated between the 4 strategic pillars that it presents. And I think the natural question is, was this difficult? Did you find that it was very challenging to establish these linkages?
Well, firstly, I have to give big ups to Sharon Orr, who heads the finance team, and the rest of the finance team at Fred Hollows, because they really embraced this and done a good job. But it comes right back to my very first comment around clarity of why the organisation exists and how it delivers. As a governance body, we want to know that our resource allocations are going where we think they're going. So it's actually about lining up your reporting so that you can see that on a regular basis. It's joining the dots. It's making sure that what you're saying you want to achieve, you're then actually taking positive action, budgeting for that, and then reporting on that. And it comes back to that logical line from purpose to performance, rather than this being a separate end-of-year exercise. And then that, to me, is just the biggest positive piece about it is if it's going to be easy, you need to make sure that the way that you are reporting on a regular monthly basis for management and for the board actually ties into your strategy and how you're hoping to deliver. It shouldn't be a year-end reconciliation process. It should just be a logical year-end summarization, or what do we need to report, or what can we cut out? My board gets health and safety information, which absolutely we have to do that. But to be perfectly honest, most of our external stakeholders kind of just expect that we'll look after health and safety, and that's not a really exciting set of statistics for them. So needless to say, that's not highlighted in our service performance reporting.
No, it seems as though it's very much a story of, if you're clear about why you exist, you should be clear about where you're putting money, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that if you've got the reporting set up well, then you should have a good feedback loop. It should be, we intend to invest this much money in actual surgery, but hey, COVID comes along, right? The reporting should clearly show that, we haven't been able to deliver on that much. And then we've got a feedback loop in terms of, right, what do we do about that? Do we reallocate some of that? How do we tell the story in relation to it? So it should be an ongoing feedback loop for your resource allocation, and are you getting the results that you plan to get?
There is another question I had on this topic, and it was whether there was anything that you wanted to do in terms of these linkages that just was not possible.
I think there's always things you want to do. Nothing immediately springs to mind. It's more about the challenge of how much, and I guess I think of the analogy of an onion. How far do we want to peel the onion? The finance team that's handling the detail obviously think the detail needs to be reported to the level of detail that they're dealing with it. That's not going to be the same as what senior management thinks. It's not going to be the same as what the board thinks. So there's always that balancing of information and what's the right level to report. And if you think again of an onion, having your systems so that you can quickly peel into the onion is great. And most accounting reporting systems now are much better at that. They allow you to delve into information more deeply, so that you've got it set up that way. That's useful then from a governance management point of view, but then you probably only want to report that at a very summary level in your external reporting. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It does, and it certainly seems as though what it's important to think about is the user. It's who is it that's actually picking up this information, and what is it that they need to know.
and that's a really important point, and it's a point that we've tried to stress with the team, is that who are our stakeholders? Whose shoes do we need to be standing in, or whose glasses do we need to be wearing when we're looking at this information? Because they're not going to be coming at it with a level of knowledge that we have. So what's most appropriate? And all of your stakeholders are not equal either. And that's a really important thing for full purpose organizations to get their head around, because we like to be nice and we like to think everybody is equal. But actually, sometimes, some are more of a funding source and they need to have a little bit more directed towards them, so that you're securing that really important funding.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And if I go back now to sustainable coastlines, this is, again, it's another kind of question about the more qualitative aspects of service performance reporting. And one of the things that service performance reporting allows for and is encouraged is the use of these qualitative measures, and I believe frequently mentioned is the use of case studies. And I've noticed in reading Sustainable Coastlines report that there are ample case studies that are being used, and I'm assuming that this is a very, very small selection of all of the things that you've done. So how is it that you decided on which case studies you wanted to use for each of the three main programs? And did you know that going into it, those were the studies that you were wanting to use, or did it just come out of the experience of running the programs?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, I guess. So we're collecting stories and anecdotes from people that we work with all the way through the year and through the duration of the program. And one of the reasons we do that is because we think it's really important to show, not tell. So rather than getting out and telling everyone what we do and what we're good at, we prefer to find ways to evidence that. And I think one of the ways to evidence that is to have your partners, your volunteers, your funders talk to what they think about you as an organisation and what they think your programs are achieving and how it impacts them. And for so much of what we do, community engagement is a really big part of it. So it's really important to us that we know what our communities are experienced by the work that we do and how that's benefiting them and ultimately the environment. So yeah, we're collecting them up all through the year. And then I think in terms of selection into the report, often it's about what might exemplify the focus of the report or the program or the impacts at that time. So some of the time we're reporting on communities engaged or trees planted or litter collected or innovation in that space or something new that's happening. We'll be looking for anecdotes or quotes or case studies that exemplify that, sometimes it's about balance too, providing a bit of a alternative view to what the data might suggest, or to add a bit more value to that. We're seeing a drop off in organizations, commercial organizations that come out and do cleanups with us. Why is that? Is it a result of COVID? How do you dig into that without just sort of showing the numbers or providing your input? So I think it's really useful to know that, through some of those lockdown periods, and particularly the confusion around settings, that a lot of corporates just found it easier not to do anything than they did to try and address that or figure out how they keep their staff safe and go out and do events and engage in community activity. So that's the sort of thing that we can get from an anecdote or a quote from someone or a case study much more satisfactorily than we can if we sort of, just present our view on that. And I think it's really important for the reader, to Craig's point earlier, our audiences are really varied, but it's really important that we give them a balanced view of us as an organisation and our performance. And it helps to have other people's opinions in there to achieve that.
Fantastic. Thank you. I have one more general question, really, for all of you, and it's that often there are a lot of competing voices asking for information on what organizations do. Do you find that you get requests for information that you don't present? Or, I mean, this could be from a funder, it could be from just a member of the public. Is there something maybe that someone asked for that you thought, actually, oh, that's not a bad idea, maybe we should report that regularly? Maybe I'll start in this case with Jan.
I can't think of an example, sorry, at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, we're certainly very much open to any suggestions, but I can't think of anything. We do a huge amount of reporting to various government agencies and etc. And there's nothing that springs to mind actually. So
can I riff on that? And it's just Jan's comment that there's a huge amount of reporting required to government departments. So I'm involved in another organisation where we get a multitude of contracts. Most of the organisation's funding comes from government, and the audit impost of that is bordering on ridiculous. In fact, we're actually looking at how we can make some formal complaints around it, because the time that can be involved in accountability on contracts can outweigh the use of actually having the contracts. It makes it so ridiculous. One of the most heartening comments for me when service performance reporting was first put in for tiers 3 and 4 entities was from a significant funder, largest philanthropic body in the Southern Hemisphere, in fact. And they said, this is fantastic. Now we can get 85 to 90% of the information that we need in terms of funding from the annual performance report, rather than getting the annual financial statements and then maybe getting 50% of the information that we need, but then having to go and search their website and then have to go and ask a whole lot more information. So that to me was a real success factor of service performance reporting, that it's obviously helping tell the story better about what an organization exists for and what it does. My hope is that we can get more organizations to be as enlightened as that particular funder, and specifically government departments that are providing funding, and not, have a think about what it is they actually need, and see whether that's actually now already being provided under the umbrella of service performance reporting, rather than having to separately go in and audit and ask for separate reports on things, because it does get to the point of just almost beating some organizations into submission.
Sure. Just to clarify for me, is the statement here really that these government departments have funding contracts that they give you, and then they often go in and do their own independent audit or ask for a separate audit of something different than just the audited financial statements and service performance information?
Correct. Yeah. So they will go in and audit their funded contract. I guess, however, my point is that the audited financial statements, so that the audit process around the financial statements is considerable. And now the audit around service performance fleshes that out even further in terms of showing the accountability of what the organisation is actually doing. So I think there's an opportunity for refinement here, and saving a lot of time and frustration for organisations, and really importantly, allowing them to focus on the money, what it is they actually exist for. And in this particular organisation that I referred to, we've been doing a little bit of research as to how much person time is being subsumed by this different reporting. And admittedly, this organisation does have a lot of different contracts. But it's a ridiculous amount of person hours, which takes them away from frontline delivery.
Yeah, I think related to that, one of the things that I think is really useful in service reporting and just reporting in general is content sustainability. So we have a real mantra around the organisation. We're always trying to think about how we can reuse content, how data that we've produced can be used elsewhere, or how information requested can be used elsewhere too. So we're sort of recording that, collating that, so that we've got it up our sleeve when we need it too. And I think that's really important for organisations as reporting becomes more and more important across so many factors. You want to have that information at hand and make the most of it, because it can also create good stories, good reports back about our mahi. So that's that content sustainability, I think, is really important in all of this.
Maybe that is something that I should ask of you, Jan, as well. Do you find that you've got similar pressures in terms of reporting to SSPs and separate contracts?
Yes, absolutely. And as a for purpose or not for profit, our resourcing is always an issue. And so just even like over the last week or so, we had to report on a lot of information on helping with living wage and minimum wage information within our business. Is that when the government are looking at the next minimum wage increase or next living wage increase. So that's just an example of one thing. Another big area, we've been really lucky to have support under the Ministry of the Arts and Culture Support Scheme for our cancelled ballets during COVID, and which is absolutely fantastic. But the work involved in the compliance around that and the application process and then the follow-up, putting the claims and everything is absolutely massive. And it's just having the resourcing and place to be able to do that, that is huge. So big issue reporting, and so the more that we can make our service reporting as efficient and as we can, make us a huge difference.
Yeah, so I think that really does drive home that there's possibly a need to further promote service performance reporting as hey, are you guys aware that there's this other thing that should tell you exactly what you need to know about what we do, and that has been audited, because there is an auditing standard that applies to it now. Well, that, I believe, was everything that I wanted to ask. So is there anything that any of you wanted to cover off that I haven't asked about?
I guess I'd make the comment, Jamie, that there's a lot of people out there looking for the right answer to this. And there is no right answer. This is about an organisation telling its story, hopefully as successfully as it can in terms of why it exists and delivering on its purpose. And it should be as different as there are numbers of organisations. It should actually have the DNA of the organisation shining through. And the key is, to me, are you actually successfully communicating to your stakeholders? That's the test. That's the question we're trying to answer with this.
I'd sort of add to that and say I think we in this report we're referring to, we made quite a shift away from how we'd done reporting previously. So we'd always reported on our outputs. We had a lot of data, but not a lot of storytelling and not a lot of depth. And I think the value of putting that effort in has come to the fore. So not so much in being recognised for this award, but just in terms of the value going back to funders, for people to be able to dig into who we are, that DNA that Craig's talking about, and understand us as an organisation has been really beneficial. And it's a document that we use often when we're talking to new funders for the first time, or potential partners, or just as background information about who we are. So I think it's well worth the effort, and if done well, can be something that serves over time as a really good introduction, and if not a complete sort of digest of you as an organisation. So I think it's well worth the effort, and I'd encourage all other organisations to just put the time and effort into it, because it pays off.
Fantastic. And Jan, any final thoughts?
No, I think I think the process is works really well, and I think for us, and I totally agree about. I'm so pleased that the framework is very open, so that it's not too prescriptive, so that we can tell our story individually because we're all quite different businesses, and as examples, just for the three of us. So yeah, I really love that it's not so prescriptive and requirements.
And on that very positive note, I think we'll have to wrap up there, but thank you all very much for your time. And I'm sure that everybody has found this to be incredibly helpful. And if you have any more questions and you're watching at home, either for us as the XRB or possibly for the organizations here you might want to get in touch with, please do feel free to do that. We'll put links to their contact information, the organizations that is, rather than your personal contact information, in the event descriptions. So thank you once again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.